Alright, let's talk about how to hit humans, and let's talk about the back fist. The back fist is a technique in the way that I was taught, it was a snapping back fist, right? And it's useful for sparring. I always felt like if I can back fist you, I can jab you, and I like the solidity of the jab, and I also like the fact that I get to keep my center line. And throughout every art that I've studied, those Wing Chun principles of the center line, which exists in all arts, but Wing Chun truly knows how to dominate that center line, have stayed with me. Those principles have stayed with me, okay? And there is that sort of kind of a Jeet Kune Do-ish back fist where I would be in a guard position for a jab, and it would start off kind of like a jab, but then migrate into a back fist and come back. It wouldn't have a lot of power, but it would score, right? And I could, jab and back fist and jab and hook and then throw my rear hand and set up kicks. And I like to use front foot quite a bit. And those were all sparring instances. Now, there was a training accident, let's call it a training accident, outside of martial arts studio. I was training this guy. His name was Manuel, and Manny, they called him. And I think they were of maybe Cuban descent, Cuban or Puerto Rican. Him and his brother. And they were like, how do I describe them? They were they had a dark complexion and dark hair, but they were very white. Right, they grew up around a lot of white people, and they're like, yo, dude, they were like Jersey boys, and they dated white women, and they hung out with all white guys. That's where they grew up. So they sounded more like suburban, blue class Jersey than they did any Latin influence, all right? And Manny was, great shape. Dude was always ripped, even if he ate nothing but junk food, and he was very enthusiastic about martial arts. He was taking private lessons from me, and one day we were working out in I think it was Veterans Park in Hamilton in New Jersey, right? We were just having a good old time. We did some techniques, some form, we did some sparring, and I said, hey, I want to show you a new technique, and it was a Kenpo technique. I had just discovered Panther videos and Larry Tatum. And I loved Larry Tatum's videos, and I forget exactly which technique I was doing. And I'd also watched a few Kajikembo videos, the grab defense. And I was done with the Kempo technique, and as I cross-stepped out, I threw a back fist, right? And I threw a light, snappy back fist with very little penetration. But for some reason, I wanted to back fist him in the kidneys, right? So I gave him what felt like a light tap to the kidneys as I was cross-stepping away. There is that Kenpo principle that you can actually hit hard while moving away by using stance and torque and what they call marriage of gravity. So, I had done my technique, and as I'm doing a crossover, a front crossover in this direction, but what looks like a rear crossover in that direction, I threw my low back fist with the checking hand, tapped him, and brought my hand back. Manny dropped like a stone. He stayed there like, oh, right? And I was like, that's gotta be, are you okay? He's like, man, why'd you hit me so hard? I'm like, I just tapped you. He's like, it may feel like a tap to you. Damn, man. Felt like you punched me full force. I'm like, I'm sorry. I didn't know that was going to go down that way, right? Now, there's another type of back fist, which, where you hit and pass completely through, and you've got to have another hand up in check because you're temporarily open, so it would look like pow, right? Pow. And you can also do it with a hammer fist, which is in a lot of Kung Fu Sansu, and I practice a lot of those swinging back fists and hammer fists these days because I like to put my weight behind things, and I like to use that as kind of a finishing shot after a combo, right? But yeah, the kidneys, even on a guy who's in great shape and has muscles on his body and can outrun you, outlift you, out push up you. It was sobering, right? And I've also heard that if the person you're fighting is a recreational drinker, if they like to drink a lot of alcohol, especially if they tied one on last night, the kidneys and the liver are extremely vulnerable. I've heard of, I think this was in Highland Park, New Jersey, and I was hanging out at an associate, someone I knew who I went to college with, who had opened a Tai Chi class right after we got out of college at Rutgers University. And Highland Park is a very Jewish neighborhood. He's Jewish. He had a mostly Jewish clientele, but also some Goyim, right? And I think this was one of what they would call a Goyim student body. And, we were talking about martial arts stuff after the class. We went and got something to eat. And he's like, yeah, my friend so-and-so, he loves Muay Thai. He works out, but he likes to drink. And, if he's had something to drink the night before and they put a knee in his liver, he just vomits. And the teacher's like, can you not do that? Like, when you know you're going to come in, can you not drink the night before? Because I'm tired of cleaning up your vomit here in the gym, right? And I was like, well, that does make sense now, doesn't it? Right? Just as if you're in a fight in a bar, I would think hitting the bladder would cause tremendous distress to anyone who's been drinking all night, right? Bladder story. I was teaching private lessons here in my old studio apartment, which is, part of this building, but I've upgraded to a two room. And there was an older gentleman that I was training. He had studied Taekwondo before going to Vietnam, and that was a long time ago. And he was still in pretty good shape. He was very small. He was shorter than me, petite, and closing in on 70, and fairly fit. I mean, he had some joint issues, but they weren't severe. And I talked about the bladder. And he's just like, I don't see, how that could hurt anybody. And I was like, throw a punch. And even though he was shorter than me, I ducked down and I just took one finger and I, tapped him. I think my finger depressed about this far into him, right? Depressed the flesh. I hit him fairly fast. Bounced it off, but I didn't go for penetration or power. And I said, that's where it would go. If you feel like that hurts now, imagine a kick or a punch. Imagine a toe. Imagine a fist. And, that was near the end of the lesson, and he was gone for 2 weeks. And I was like, all right. Then I heard from him, and he came back, and he's like, can you never demonstrate like that on me again? I'm like, sure. What happened? He goes, well, I couldn't piss for a few days. I thought I was going to have to go to the hospital. And I remember he was older and he's very, thinly built. And as I mentioned, I hit someone in the bladder before and I don't feel bad about it. And he was uppercutting me in the face. He was yanking my jacket over my head, bending me over and uppercutting my face. So, I feel zero qualms about that. That's what you get. Anatomy. Right? Have you ever thought, for example, about this nerve? This nerve exits the jawbone and then re-enters it and is exposed here. Right? You can palpate along it and find it. It's a very painful spot, right? And here, you could try hook punches and stuff, but a hammer fist, a diagonal hammer fist, coming across or downward at that angle would just light it up, as would an elbow. Right? You ever think about the juncture of the jaw? An associate of mine, the late Ed Youngsa. Ed Youngsa passed away a few years ago. And he was quite adept with his feet. Right? He could walk around in combat boots, and on a cold winter's day with zero warm up and stretch, just start hopping around and throwing hook kicks and spinning hook kicks, right? Mostly with his right leg. He had issues with his left. So I remember he got in an altercation at a gas station. He hook kicked the guy in the head and knocked him out. And he just filled his car. It was self-service, so I think it might have been in Pennsylvania at the time. This was, I think, the 90s. Drove off. And he said, you know, I was tempted. I was thinking of taking the heel of that combat boot and hitting him at the juncture of the jaw and see if I could break it. I'm like, Ed, I'm glad you didn't, because that guy probably woke up and said, I feel like an idiot, and got back in his car and left, and that was that. Had you broken his jaw, there would have been legal trouble, right? But Ed knew his anatomy as far as that went. Wasn't much with his hands, but, you know, I tried to help him with that. Blind spot. If you move your hand, there's a certain spot right about there where they drop out of your vision, and even if you look, it just moves, but there is a blind spot. That is why a lot of techniques go to a 45-degree angle in to get in the opponent's blind spot. From there, he's helpless, right? If someone comes in and you counter hit and move into the blind spot, not only do you have an opportunity to hit, but you have multiple opportunities to hit, because with that lack of data and the pain of your initial hit registering, they're kind of frozen in space, right? And it's difficult for them to turn around and target and hit as they're being hit from the blind spot. That is anatomy. Bas Rutten said something on one of his videos about how stupid all these people are, talking about poking you in the eye and grabbing you in the groin. And, you know, his example of why he knows for sure that that's wrong is that he was at a seminar, and, you know, he was demonstrating a choke to a female who was older than him, thin, and had no, I would say, professional fighting experience. She was a self-defense instructor, and she's like, well, I just poke you in the eye. And he said he slapped that choke on her. Mind you, the choke was already on her, and he's like, go ahead, I'll break your neck. Try and poke me in the eye, see if you can do it before I break your neck. And he probably terrified this woman, you know, who, you know, maybe was a bit overconfident in her techniques. But he's like, that stuff doesn't work. He's Bas Rutten, okay? Realize, though, I guarantee that if in MMA we signed like some kind of amnesty deal to where if you killed or maimed someone in the ring, there was zero danger of prosecution, and if we just allowed people to attack the eyes and the throat and the back of the head and the spine and the testicles, you would see that this stuff would work, and it would drastically change the game, right? Not only that, he must have not watched much MMA, because every single time in MMA that someone gets an eye jab, that fight shuts down, sometimes for 3 or 4 minutes, and the doctor's there giving him ice, attending to him, and sometimes they can't get back up and fight again. How can you say that that wouldn't work? Right? And if you know jiu-jitsu, when you're in grappling range, if you know jiu-jitsu and you incorporate those attacks into your jiu-jitsu, you will destroy the person who only knows jiu-jitsu but has never trained against those attacks. If you don't believe me, again, allow it in competition and give prize money for it. Give prize money for the eye gouge of the night. Give prize money and amnesty from persecution for killing someone by hitting them in the throat. It'll happen all the time, right? What kind? I don't know, but again, a lot of sport martial artists don't really understand anatomy when it comes to targets and weapons, because they're not allowed to hit it. Why? Because people would start dying in the ring and being crippled. People's spines would be damaged from actual neck cranks, and they'd be in a wheelchair with tubes in their butt and lungs. if you're serious about deciphering some of the information in the classic martial arts, if you're serious about understanding what karate and hungar and old Aikido Jiu-Jitsu and Shaolin Kung Fu or Wing Chun or Kung Fu Sansu are all about, then you need to have a fantastic study, a deep study of human anatomy and reflex and things like that, or you will never ever be able to comprehend the material that's been given to you. Alright, you may as well just join an MMA gym or learn Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because you'll never understand striking. You'll never understand maiming. You'll never understand how to stop a grappler from grappling, even if they've already taken you down, without relying on Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or Greco-Roman wrestling. Okay? Study anatomy.